Hello and happy Sunday. Thank you for inviting me back to the Unitarian Fellowship of Houston. It's so wonderful to be able to celebrate a holiday with you virtually. And one day we'll celebrate it again together. A few years ago, we actually had a Passover Seder at the church, at the fellowship together. And that was a great joy. Today is Passover. It is the Jewish holiday that many feel is the most important holiday on our entire calendar. It is certainly the one that Jewish people observe more than any other. If there is a Jewish person who is not observant of many holidays, if they only observe one, Passover is the one. This is the connection. It's the connection with a promise, the promise of freedom. And freedom is not an easy concept. I'm going to be a little bit historical and a little bit philosophical, and hopefully to connect ways that one people's story is a story for all. Now, the story of Passover, most think about the book of the Bible that is named Exodus. And that certainly makes sense. Exodus means leaving. And the book of Exodus is about the Israelites leaving Egypt to go into the wilderness on a journey to the promised land. But the Hebrew name of the Bible happens to be Shemot, which means names. The book of Exodus begins. These are the names of the sons of Jacob, the children of Israel, who came to Egypt. Why is it important about the names? Well, it's about people. And it goes further back into the book of Genesis, into the stories of the beginnings of our people, where, if you recall, there was a man named Jacob who had 12 sons and a daughter. And the sons did not respect their brother Joseph, because they hated him because his father loved him more. It's a whole mishmash of a story where they sell him into slavery after plotting to kill him. He goes to Egypt. He goes to jail. He does all kinds of different things, and he ends up, because of his talent as a dream interpreter, he ends up saving the Egyptian nation, becoming Pharaoh's assistant, because he develops a plan that will save them from a famine that plagues the entire area. Jacob's family is in the midst of that famine, and they come to beg for food, and Joseph reconciles with his brothers and brings them all to Egypt. And with his newfound power in the Pharaoh's palace, in the king's palace, they thrive. And the Israelites and the Egyptians, they get along. People who start the Passover story with Exodus don't remember that part. Don't remember that they got along. Because Egypt, my friends, is not just a geography. It's not just a political state. Egypt is a word in Hebrew that means a narrow place. And how does this narrowness come about? Well, that's where we get to the beginning of the book of Exodus, where it says, a new king arose in Egypt who did not know Joseph. There's that interesting word, know. What does it take to get to know somebody? Know. In Hebrew, the word is yada. And the first time that word, yada or know, is mentioned in the Bible is when Adam knew his wife and they produced a child. Of course, you probably remember when you first learned that back in maybe 4th or 5th grade, and you would giggle to your friends, oh, do they know each other in the biblical sense? And we giggled about that when we were kids. But knowing is an intimate knowledge. And so when it says that Adam knew his wife, that is the intimacy that love produces children. And when it says that Pharaoh did not know Joseph, it doesn't mean he never met him. Joseph had been dead for years. And it doesn't mean that he didn't know about him, because the Egyptians apparently kept very good records. No, they had lost the intimacy. They had lost the knowledge. And so the king of Egypt did not know the Hebrews. They lived in another section. They had different customs. And it says that he feared that they would become too numerous. Well, this is about when we don't know. Then we have fear. Then we have ignorance. Then we have prejudice. When we don't know our neighbor, then we cannot understand who they are. And when we know somebody, we can disagree with them. But when you really know someone, it's pretty hard to hate them. And so, out of the fear of lack of knowledge, the king of Egypt declared that babies would be killed, declared that the Israelites would be enslaved. And for generations, they were oppressed and they were slaves in the place called Mitzrayim, Hebrew for Egypt, that narrow place, but not just the narrowness of a land, but narrow-mindedness, the feeling that we need to hurt people, to oppress people who are different than us, the feeling that power is dependent on someone else's suffering. And that was the existence for a number of generations. And in the story, as I quickly summarize a few things, the young boy Moses was saved from this murder. Why was he saved? Because two midwives, Shiphrah and Puah were their names. They're named in the Bible. Two midwives decided to defy Pharaoh's law, decided to do a plan to make sure that this baby was saved. Now, when we take that idea of defying an unjust law into modern times, symbolically, at the Passover meal, we have a custom where we're encouraged to slouch, to lean, to defy that idea that sit up straight at the table, but to lean over, to show that we are free. And that's just one of the many rituals that happens at the Passover meal that reminds us of what freedom is and what bitterness used to be. In the story, we go on, and there was a great miracle that happened when the king finally let go of his hold on the Israelites. They came to a sea. And if you remember Cecil B. DeMille's famous movie, the sea split open and the Israelites traveled to dry land. If your mind goes back to the movie, you also see a rather frightening scene afterwards where they escape the soldiers that were chasing them, and the water engulfs the soldiers while the Israelites flee to safety. Well, this is a classic situation of the good guys win and the bad guys die. But it's also a significant story because in the Bible, the Israelites travel through safely. The Egyptians are drowned. But then we have what's called a midrash. Midrash are the legends that help embellish the stories. Because in the Bible, the Israelites sing with their newfound freedom. In the midrash, there are angels that also sing and dance in heaven. And as they're singing and dancing, God chides them and says to the angels, how can you be rejoicing when my children are suffering? This is a very powerful moment in the story and in the legend that we take through to this time, because we are taught not to rejoice with someone else's suffering. And so one of the exciting parts of the Passover Seder is that we consume 4 glasses of wine. But that second glass, we don't drink the whole thing. We diminish our cup. You may remember that the story also includes 10 plagues that were visited upon the Egyptians. Well, we take 10 dips out of our cups in order to remember that our joy is not complete if it's because of someone else's suffering. The most significant symbol of Passover is matzah. Matzah, this flat, dry cracker. And the story about the matzah is that we were in a hurry to flee and we did not have time for bread to rise. But the stories go on. And the stories are more significant when we think about what does it mean, because the matzah is flat and pretty tasteless. And this is a reminder of humility, that we are meant to take this week where we don't eat bread. For the bread that rises is about ego. It's about filling ourselves and our heads with the idea that we are so important. And we remember our humble beginnings, that we were victims, and then we won our freedom, but that doesn't make us better than anybody else. And it certainly doesn't make us permitted to oppress others. In fact, the very first commandments after the 10 commandments are how to treat servants. That we're taught not to treat people the way we were treated, but to treat them the way we would have wanted to be treated. And we all know that people have a tendency sometimes to follow what they've been taught. That those who have addictions, whose parents have addictions, sometimes become susceptible to addiction. Those who were in abusive families sometimes are susceptible to becoming abusers themselves. And some people have the strength and the learning to break those patterns. And this is what the Torah teaches. Break the pattern. If you were oppressed, once you get into a position where you have some power, treat people kindly. My own stepson has learned this lesson. He's a chef. And many chefs, as you see on TV, who get big and who rise to the top of their profession, they remember when they were treated at the bottom of the barrel, when they were washing dishes and mopping floors. And sometimes chefs become rather like tyrants because they were pushed down and then they push someone else down. My son has learned differently. He remembered when he had the harshest jobs and the harshest boss, and he said, I'm not going to be like that when I'm a boss. And he has learned to treat his employees well. He pays them a little bit more than he got paid when he had that position. He tries to treat them with kindness and give them the amount of days off that they need. And here is how learning from our sacred teachings help us move forward. During the Passover meal, we take a piece of the matzah and we break it. And we hide part of it. We hide the bigger piece. And this is a children's game. It's called the Afi Komen, because the Passover meal can't be finished, according to tradition, until that last piece is eaten and the last taste of our mouth is the bread of affliction. And so we hide one of the pieces for children to find. And it keeps them interested and active during the Passover Seder. But symbolically, it has another meaning. First of all, it never breaks exactly in half. So which half do we hide? The big one or the little one? We hide the bigger one because we're taught that there is more that is hidden than is revealed. That Passover is all about trying to find deeper meanings. And so as the children are looking for the hidden matzah, the adults are looking for hidden meanings, for hidden ways that we can grow. And then at the end of the meal, when a child finds that matzah, we have another understanding. Because how are we going to find the real answers? How are we going to find the ways to make the world whole? The children are the ones we can count on. And so at the end of the meal, the puzzle becomes more complete. The matzah is whole. And we count on our children to bring us to that place. We also have a custom of eating bitter herbs. It's usually horseradish, and it's a harsh taste in our mouth. Everything we do, there's a blessing involved in it, thanking God for giving us this opportunity. And so we say, Baruch atah Adonai, blessed are you, God, who makes us holy with commandments, commanding us to eat the bitter herbs. And there was someone who asked his rabbi, why do I need to say this blessing? I get the idea that I'm supposed to eat the bitter herbs to remind us of the bitterness of slavery. But do I really want to thank God for making me taste something so bitter? And the rabbi responded, I thank God that my life was made that bitter. Because if it had not been so bitter, I might not have left. What an interesting statement. How many of us are aware of people who stay with things longer than is necessary and continue to suffer because it wasn't bad enough? Whether it's an addiction, a bad relationship, a job they hate, that until it gets so bad that we need to leave, we stick around. The legend is that 80% of the enslaved Israelites didn't even leave Egypt when they had the opportunity because of the devil you know versus the devil you don't know. The mystery of the wilderness was scary for them. And so let's talk about that, because that's the next book of the Bible. Actually, the fourth book. Exodus is the second. The fourth book is the book of Numbers, which chronicles some of the journey throughout the desert. But in Hebrew, it's called Bamidbar, which means both in the desert and in the wilderness. And what is a wilderness? A wilderness is a mystery. We don't know what's going to happen next. And in that mystery, well, the journey of the Israelites had so many trials and tribulations. They had times when they didn't have enough food. They had times when they didn't have enough water. They had times when they were anxious about how long it was taking. They had times when enemies would try and prevent them from moving along on their journey. But the taste of freedom, the idea of the taste of freedom kept them going. To mention something else about this matzah, because in truth, it tastes horrible. It tastes kind of like salted cardboard. It's just flour and water. The opportunity a number of times to do a Passover Seder in prison with incarcerated men. And we call the matzah the bread of affliction that our forefathers ate in the desert. Well, for these incarcerated men, the bread of affliction was the taste of freedom. That their lives are so regimented that when it came time that they were permitted to enjoy a Passover meal, this was an excitement to them. And so we also think about what enslaves us, what keeps us from feeling truly free, and what little things can help us find that. Imagine being incarcerated, having no freedom at all, and said, well, your religion is going to be important to you on this day, and so we're going to let you celebrate. And one of my colleagues, Rabbi David Goldstein, always makes sure that Jewish inmates have matzah on Passover, and they taste a little bit of freedom at that time. Back to the idea of when we were in Egypt and when we left, because part of the story is that each of us in every generation should imagine that we are going out. And we tell the same story every year, but look for and find new and different meanings. And throughout the entire Torah, there is one teaching that is repeated more often than any other. And that is, treat the stranger as one of your own, for you are strangers in the land of Egypt. We remember what oppression is and try and make sure that nobody else feels that way. And when we receive the gift, the 10 Commandments, that first commandment is, I am your God who led you out of Egypt, out of bondage. This is the foundation that we have, that our very existence is about breaking into a new space. And what was the narrowest place we ever were in? The beginning of life. We were in a womb. There, we had no freedom, but we had no needs. Everything was provided for us inside our mother. And just like the Garden of Eden, we have a need to find our challenges. Oh, would life had been so easy if Adam and Eve had stayed in the Garden of Eden and not eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and had to go out into the world, and oh, would things be so easy if we could just stay in that precious womb inside our mother, have all our food fed to us through tubes, and just have that swimming feeling. But no, we want a challenge. We want to spring forth. We struggled and kicked and pushed until finally we got out of our mother's womb. And throughout our lives, we struggle and we push to grow up, to get more responsibility, to get more knowledge, to be able to be truly free, because that's what's inside. I'm going to indulge for a moment about a personal story, because I think that the personal element makes things universal. There was a time several years ago when I was in a very transitional part of my life. I had just moved into a new home. I was in a new relationship that I wasn't sure how it was going. There were all kinds of exciting mysteries ahead of me. And to top things off, I was scheduled to present at a major conference of educators, and I didn't know what I was going to present. And right before the conference, a friend of mine lent me a condo in Colorado, a few miles away from where the conference was being held. And I decided that I wanted to have that opportunity to relax from my move, from my relationship, from the conference, to take a few days and just relax with a couple of friends. Have you ever heard the expression, hurry up and relax? It wasn't working for me. I spent the entire time in that condo stressing about my conference presentation, stressing about the year that was coming up. And the night before, The night before the conference was going to start, while I was trying so hard to focus on preparing my conference presentation, doing laundry to get ready for the next week, the dryer broke in my friend's condo. The dryer broke. I had a washer filled with wet clothes. What were we going to do? And so my friend and I drove to a laundromat. He dropped me off so that I could finish drying the clothes, and he went to go get a pizza. And while I was in that laundromat, some people who recognized me, who were planning to go to the conference, walked into the laundromat, and I was not feeling social. Oh, look who it is. It's the Storyteller. Oh, aren't you excited? The conference is starting tomorrow. Did you meet my husband? He's a rabbi too. Oh, isn't this exciting? And I made some pleasantries and tried to sneak off to a corner so that I could put my clothes in several different dryers so they would dry faster and I could get out of this situation. And as I am putting clothes in the last dryer, I felt a presence. Actually smelled a presence near me. There was a man, and he said, "Excuse me, did they call you Rabbi?" And I said, "Sort of." And I could smell the blend of sweat and alcohol and urine. And he said, "I need you to come with me." And I said, "I'm doing my laundry right now." And he took a quarter and put it in my machine and said, "I need you to come with me." And I remembered how my mother always said, "Don't go with strangers." And how the book of Leviticus says, "Treat the stranger as one of your own, for you are strangers in the land of Egypt." And so I went with him into a hallway just outside the laundromat. I'm going to digress from this story for a moment to tell you two more things about the Passover meal. One of them is that there are questions that children are expected to ask, and it's called the 4 questions, and they're meant to inspire so many other questions. And the other is, we open a door for the mystical prophet of Elijah in hopes that we will become ready for his introduction into a messianic age. And here in the middle of this laundromat, I wasn't thinking about Passover or 4 questions or Elijah. I was simply thinking about my safety. And we got into the hallway, and there were 2 folding chairs. We sat down, and this man told me a story. He told me that he was an alcoholic. His name was Chris. I asked if he had a religion. He said he used to go to the Baptist church, but he hadn't been in a very long time. He also told me he had a child that he hadn't seen in a very long time. And he said, "I'm an alcoholic, and I need you to bless me. I need you to bless me." I had not been a rabbi very long at that point. And I took his hands and I said, "Chris, you can beat this alcoholism. You're a slave to it, but you can beat it. And when you do, it will be the hardest thing you ever did. And it will be the most satisfying thing you've ever done." He was crying. And he said, "Will you give me a blessing?" And I thought I just had. But he seemed to want something a little bit more formal. And so I said to him, generations ago, my people was enslaved by humans the way you're enslaved by alcohol. We didn't see a way out, and we found one. But that was a journey and a struggle. And during that struggle that took a very long time, when we were in the desert, God spoke to Moses and his brother Aaron and told him to bless the people. And in that blessing, the people understood that they're not alone in the journey, and that somehow or other, God is with them and is going to help. And so I'm going to give you that same blessing that my people received in the desert, in hopes that along your journey, you will feel blessed. Put my hands on his head, and I said, Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. May God bless you and protect you. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'yichunecha. May God's face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May God's presence be with you and give you peace. And we hugged, and he cried, and he said, God bless you, and he left. And I went back into the laundromat to retrieve my dry clothes. And I looked around for the people who I had recognized, and they were busy doing their own laundry. They didn't have any questions. But now, remembering what Passover was, suddenly I had 4 questions. Why on this night did the dryer break? Why on this night was I the one to do the laundry while my friend got the pizza? Why on this night did Chris approach me instead of the other person in the room who was identified as a rabbi? And why do we wait until Passover to open our doors and open our hearts? The Messiah is a difficult concept for many people. Christians have embraced Jesus as a Messiah who will return one day. Jewish people have not embraced a Jesus figure, but anticipate that one day we will have a utopia, a messianic age. And our Talmud teaches us that if we were to treat each person we met as if they might be the Messiah in disguise, how would our words and our actions be different? And perhaps if we were to think in that way, we would create that utopia. And if the Messiah's identity is not revealed during our lifetime, it won't matter. We'll make it ourselves. And so during this Passover, I encourage you to look at the ways that you can make life a little more free for someone else, a little more free for yourself, and to continue the journey. It's a mysterious journey. A promised land is in sight. Happy travels to all, and to all a good night.